Off-season flurry. After getting a little over a week to digest the Dallas Jackals Dispersal Draft results, there have also been a flurry of off-season moves over the past week that we need to talk about. We break them all down, plus give our fantasy MLR Dispersal Draft winners and losers. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode 130 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thanks so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. With you each and every single week, Matt Yee. I am Ryan Yee. Devin Vanderpool could not be with us tonight, but that's okay. We will carry on. Got a jam-packed episode, Matty. Talk about a flurry of moves that have happened over the course of the past week. Obviously, just getting over the dispersal draft that happened almost 2 weeks ago. But it's being followed up by what seems to be just an absolute frenzy of teams filling their roster with some pretty notable players.
Yeah, well, I think we kind of saw this coming right after the dispersal draft happened. We're going to see a bunch of signings. We saw a bunch of releases. We're still seeing a bunch of releases. And I think that just bodes well for a good time to announce signings as well. And one of the teams that we're going to get to that has done some of the most action in this offseason so far is a team that had the most releases happen kind of all in one announcement. So we will see and get to that. And I'm excited to kind of talk over these because some of these are kind of close to home for me and close to my bread and butter.
Yeah, so we'll get into all the moves that have happened, and also this episode, of course, like I mentioned at the top, we've had some time to digest the dispersal draft, and we're going to be going over.
And Ryan, we've given time for. And we'll talk about one of them, but we've given time for teams to actually sign their draft pick.
Right. And then we're starting to see some of those announcements coming out. Again, we'll get into kind of that logistics stuff a little bit later on, but this is all about the fantasy MLR winners and losers. I think that's going to be a little bit different than what are the actual winners and losers, because we know how sometimes when it comes to opportunity, playing time, things like that, some moves may look better on paper when it comes to the actual playing game versus fantasy MLR. And then we're going to talk to our viewers, talk to our fantasy MLR league members and community members about what players and what people kind of benefited the most from the dispersal draft. So again, all that in this episode 130, all those offseason moves, all the dispersal draft reaction stuff. We touched a little bit last episode. Again, we had Jake Turnbull on the show of Anthem RC last episode.
Legend.
So if you missed that, new friend of the show, check that out. It was a fun conversation with him, getting some insight into Anthem RC and their offseason that they've had. Couldn't speak too much about the signings, or at least the draft picks that Anthem made, but I think we can connect the dots there that he's pretty dang excited for the season that is coming up for Anthem RC, which I think we are too. So it's going to be a nice, fun episode here to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of those. But before we get into it, again, mentioned Vandy's not here today. Just want to give a quick shout out. He's just dealing with some family stuff. So again, here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show, obviously a big Fantasy Ruckers family here from us, the hosts, to all of our viewers and all our community members. We just want to send the best wishes to Vandy and his family. Again, we're all in this together in terms of the community that we are, tight-knit group. And again, we always try to emphasize how we are people that are there for each other. So just want to give our best wishes and thoughts to Vandy and his family. So let's dive into it. But before we do, like we say every episode, if you aren't already, give us a follow at the Fantasy Ruckers. Matt, you want to know a big announcement? You want to know a big announcement?
I'd love to know, and I'm glad that there's not trumpets coming before it.
But we do have celebration to do because we have hit that 100 subscriber mark on YouTube, which is very, very, very cool to see. It does lend itself, not the trumpets, Maddie, that you're attuned to, but I think you like this sound a little bit better. A little bit of celebration music here. We want to thank our Fantasy Ruckers community members and league members for helping us get to that point. Really, really cool. I mean, I never thought the day would come that we would have so many people interested in the journey that is fantasy MLR. And 100 may not be a crazy amount, may not be enough yet to get us that silver plaque on YouTube, but hey, still a lot more than I ever thought that we would reach when we first started this fantasy MLR thing. Pretty cool.
Yeah, well, we got another step to go. It's only one step, and we
Yep.
got plenty more to get that silver plaque. So we just got to keep on grinding, I guess.
Yeah, and big shout out to all of our fantasy Ruckers, again, community members and supporters. We
And
absolutely
shout out to Abel for calling it out in the comments.
That's true. One of our biggest supporters. And again, the reason why I bring that up, let's get that number even higher. So at the Fantasy Ruckers on everywhere that you are on social media, Instagram, X, Facebook, and then like, subscribe here on the YouTube channel. We're also a
Leave
podcast that
comments.
gets released to wherever you listen to podcasts. Yeah, leave comments. We love to interact with our community. If they're good enough, they appear on our show. But again, let's keep this going. Again, we do have a Discord community as well that is continuing to grow and grow and grow. That has a fun bunch of people over there that love to talk fantasy MLR and just rugby as a whole. So make sure you hit that link down below to join that. And then, of course, we have the fantasyruckers.com that has all the latest stats and fantasy MLR stats on our website and is the official platform for our Fantasy Ruckers leagues. A very cool resource for whether you're in fantasy MLR or just an MLR fanatic as a whole. Definitely something you want to have bookmarked and tabbed in your browser. But yeah, I guess there's no time to waste here, though, Maddie. I guess we gotta dive right into it, and I think we got to just keep it on rolling. You ready to kind of get into the thick of all of it that was over the past week in terms of offseason moves?
Let's do it.
All right, let's get right into it. No time to waste, like I said. The team that you were alluding to, Maddie, that again, we talked about a couple of weeks ago about releasing a whole bunch of players that were notable in the MLR space and especially the fantasy MLR space. And that was the Utah Warriors, moving on from a whole plethora of guys. Enough so that it was just one straight social media post with a whole bunch of pictures that just said, hey, thank you for what you've done for the Utah Warriors, but see you later. And we were kind of concerned. Vandy, as a Utah Warriors fan, was kind of concerned into the state of what his team was going to look like heading into 2025. But it does seem that they might look a little bit all right. We announced some big time Pacific Islander signings last week in terms of Utah, but they've added a whole bunch more. Let me go through the list, Maddie, and then we can kind of react to what there is. A whole bunch
Let's
of
do it.
NPC signings. The latest, we got Logan Crowley, who did sign in 2024, but did not feature. He's from Taranaki Rugby. We got Remzi Lemzio, Australian U20 player, Tamaro Magahin from Harbour Rugby, and Kyle Brown from Manawatu. We also have Akiseu Ili from Samoa, a Samoan prop that is joining Utah, and also Gavin Thornberry, U20 lock from Ireland. So throwing in a Irishman there, played in the Leinster Academy along with all the Islanders. That's six big time signings, Maddie, that are going to make these Utah Warriors fans feel a lot better than how they felt maybe a couple weeks ago when they left a lot of big names off of their roster list here heading into 2025.
Yeah, I mean, look, you think about all those guys, the big names that got lost, and you think about exactly who they're bringing in,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and you see just the perfect correlation, right? Like you look at the loss of Kieran McLeay, the return of Logan Crowley, the
Mm-hmm.
return almost of Logan Crowley. You look at the loss of Thomas Tuivasa. You see the signing of Tamara McGann straight out of North Harbor, up the heat, straight out of Takapuna. He's been a regular starter for North Harbor this year. And then you look at the loss of Mika Kruse. We've seen them make center signings already, but you look at the addition of Kyle Brown, who is a center, a talented center at that, who is a regular starter from Manawatu, who's definitely going to add to that back line. So I don't know too much about the other guys, but these NPC guys, I think they're making a lot of really good additions to fill those roster spots that they lost. It's also clear that what they're doing is filling these roster spots with international guys, which I think is exactly for them the way that they kind of climb out of this mediocrity that they've had for the past few
Mm-hmm.
seasons. Because you look at the players and the standout players that they've had over the past few years. It's their international guys. It's the Joel Hodgsons. It's the it's the Dylan Nells. It's the Knicks. Well, not so much Nick Suchon, but the Henry Bell, the prior to the year before that. It's the Caleb
Mm-hmm.
McInnes. all these guys, these international guys, just standout guys and been staples for this team, and they come in and replace some of these guys with some new blood. And they're young players. I mean, Tamara 24, Kyle Brown, I don't think he's too much older. Logan Crowley's definitely young. Like these guys are looking to make a name for themselves in this league to get bigger and better opportunities.
And what's interesting, Maddie, is that this is a team, I think you nailed it on the head, has been looking to make a change, right? The talk has always been with this Utah Warriors team about the potential that they could reach and just have never reached that. Again, you can throw an injury in there, you can throw in a lot of other outside factors that have affected this Utah team. But results are results at the end of the day, and they haven't been able to get that, being in the league for as long as they have, and having a lot of those marquee names that we're so used to and familiar with. So again, it was a shock when they announced all those releasings of their players, or the departures of those players. And again, I think there was a little bit of angst and concern amongst Utah Warriors fans about, okay, how the heck are they going to replenish this?
They
And it
have a
looks
plan.
like they had a plan going into this. Whether or not, we'll
And
never know whether or not this was something they knew beforehand. And I'm sure there were discussions before when they kind of made this decision to have this big overturn. But they're going all in terms of making change. And I think whether or not it remains to be seen if this is the right decision, but it is change. And what has been for them in the past and the players that they've had hasn't worked. I wouldn't say it's been unsuccessful, but it hasn't reached the standard that they've been looking for. And they're looking
yeah,
to make that change with some of these players that are coming in. Again, six big
and
time signings over the course of the past couple of weeks since that the departures of all those players, those marquee names. I mean, you got to be feeling fantastic as a Utah Warriors fan and excited for what this could be. You don't know yet, but it's what could be.
And yeah, I'll just say one thing. Gavin Thornbury, this Irish guy at 6'8" lock. I mean,
Yeah.
Ireland is just known for some of the tallest locks in the world. I think Devin Toner comes to mind when you think of
Hmm.
one of them. 6'8". He's going to be an absolute mutant in this league, so I'm excited to see him play as well. But Rye, you see really closely this Utah team with deep management ties to New Zealand.
Yep.
They talk about how that's how they brought in Dylan Nell. You're clearly seeing that through their signings here, and you can almost call them the Utah New Zealand Warriors at this point.
Yeah. Obviously, we had that when the Iron Workers were around. They had that New Zealand tie and bringing in a lot of those New Zealanders. And obviously, with the departure of them, yeah, why don't we transfer the name over to this Utah Warriors side that does look to
Yep.
be making that move? So again, Logan Crowley, Remzi Lamisio, Tamaro McGarren, Kyle Brown, Akise Uili, and Gavin Thornbury, all the newest members of the Utah Warriors,
Congrats, Vandy.
replacing a lot of that departures. Yeah, I can't wait to have Vandy back on the show to get his reaction, because he's got to be really, really excited. If anything, I think he's got to be buying himself a brand new Utah Warriors jersey heading into this year because I think
Yeah.
excitement is at an all-time high.
And I mean, just quickly before we move on, like some of these guys are going to be instant impact guys fantasy wise, right?
Okay.
Like Crowley is going to be a guy who's going to slot into that starting spot. Kyle Brown, I think, is going to fill that 13 position. And Tamara Magan, a guy who's going to definitely fill that back row position as well. So it'll be interesting to see exactly where they are. But these are guys that you should definitely be on your fantasy radars.
And I think a big part of that too, Maddie, to round it out, is that we've seen how Utah plays, and we've seen the production from a fantasy standpoint that can come out of this Utah team. Whether or not that is something that translates to wins each week, what we did know is that it did translate to a lot of fantasy points a lot of the time. I mean, look at our number one fantasy player in Michael Manson in this 2024 year.
Yeah.
Again, electric offense. Have these big time names coming in there. We should expect to see that translate into fantasy points. All right. But Utah isn't the only team that is making moves. And a whole bunch of other teams are also making sure that they're either locking up guys that have been with them in their programs or also taking advantage of some of these picks that they've had in the dispersal draft. So we'll start off with a team that has kind of just solidified a lot of the guys that we recognize as being in their jersey. And we'll call that the Chicago Hounds, and bringing back a lot of the marquee guys. That includes Lucas Rumble, Michael Hand, Luke White, Bryce Campbell, and Noah Brown. So 5 re-signings there for the Chicago Hounds, all guys that were somewhat relevant in the season. Obviously, a lot of high hope, at least from a fantasy perspective, with Lucas Rumble coming in. Michael Hand was on loan with the Miami Sharks. He had a good season with Miami, coming back now to Chicago. And then Bryce Campbell, Luke White, Noah Brown. Noah was a streaming option. Again, all these guys were guys that I think were on fantasy rosters at some point, and they'll look to make that impact once again with Chicago once again.
Yeah, I think Noah Brown's going to be a nice step up for him. Like he had some really good flashes of brilliance last year and some kind of quiet games, but I think that he'll have a good season this year as well as Michael Hand. I think Michael Hand's going to play a lot into it. We saw him with Miami, just a big lad. So I'm excited to see both of those guys kind of make an impact this year with Chicago.
Yeah, Lucas Rumble, 52.8 fantasy points. Michael Hand had a total of 47 fantasy points. Going down the list, Luke White had a total of 89.9. Bryce Campbell, 121.8, and then Noah Brown, again, that streaming option at 89.6. So all guys that were definitely on rosters last year at some point. And again, they return with the Chicago Hounds. Chicago Hounds are expecting to make a step up. They did that last year from their first season to their second. We'll see whether or not they can make that jump from the second to their third. All right, let's move on now over to a West Coast team, the Seattle Seawolves, making a couple signings here, in large part based off of the dispersal draft. The one is Juan Pablo Zeiss, front rower. He was selected by Old Glory DC in the dispersal draft, but then quickly traded to Seattle. He will be joining the Seawolves this upcoming season. And then we also have CC Mahoney, who is joining Seattle. He departs Houston and joins the Seawolves side. So again, the Seawolves team, who is fresh coming off of a MLR finals appearance, is bolstering that depth and guys that are pretty marquee in terms of both Juan Pablo Zeiss, who is a guy that was relevant for the Dallas Jackals, and then CC Mahoney, who is also a big time part of that Houston SaberCats squad.
Yeah, I mean, a championship caliber team just bolstering their offense with championship caliber players. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this fits into the lineup.
Mahoney last year only seen the field once, didn't score any fantasy points there. We'll see whether or not he can carve himself a spot on the Seattle Seawolves. And then Juan Pablo Zeiss, kind of a streaming option, 46.1 fantasy points, started in almost every single game at that number 3 position. Definitely a guy finishing out kind of his tail end of the season with scoring at least 4.8 fantasy points. So I mean, from a fantasy side of things, we'll see whether or not he locks himself into that front row position, the Seattle Seawolves. We know that the Seattle pack has always been a force to be reckoned with, and we can count on Juan Pablo Zeiss if he's able to establish himself to translate that into fantasy points. All right, moving on to now Miami. We talk about Miami, about Michael Hand on loan with him, and then moving back to the Chicago Hounds. But Miami is bringing back three key guys over the past couple of weeks that's officially been announced. Benjamin Bonasso, Santiago Videla, and Matthias Orlando. All three of them returning to Miami. All three guys very, very relevant in fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, Matthias Orlando joined, I think, late last year, so it'll be interesting to see, and it'll be great to see a full season with him under the belt. I mean, in 3 games, he had a game with 11.6 fantasy points and another game with 8.9 fantasy points. So I'm excited to see him kind of get a full season under his belt. And Benji Bonasso, I mean, the guy was a mutant with New York. He was a mutant with Miami. He'll continue to be relevant. He'll continue to be on rosters this year for fantasy. And I'm glad he gets to do that in Miami jersey. And Videla is going to be a great 10 streamer. I mean, depending on what the situation was with Echeverry, Videla might become a very prominent guy in the lineup. He's going to be one of the guys that are going to be on every team.
Yeah.
Echeverry
starting the season at that 10 position. He finished the back half playing mostly at the fullback position, was when we saw the emergence of Videla. Actually ended up as the highest scoring Miami Sharks player with 154.4 fantasy points, a season high in round 4. He did play in the wing there at 26.3, but in week 16, 23.7 fantasy points at the fly half position, a try, 111 meters gained, a conversion kick, and 2 penalties. So you're right, Maddie. If this is a guy that's starting at 10, I think he makes that step up from just a streamer to some guy that is going to be permanently on people's rosters, knowing how beneficial and how impactful it is to have a guy that you know is going to be kicking each and every week.
Yeah, but we'll have to wait. The other thing we have to wait for is when we'll get to dispersal draft, but we'll have to wait for the draft or the signing of Martin Elias, because we know Miami took him. So we'll have to see whether they sign him. It seems like it's a perfect fit for them to sign Martin Elias. If they do, then that will also impact the value of Videla, because obviously when it comes to the 10 jersey, we do not want to see shared time,
Yep.
because that just takes two extra roster spots for you to fill.
Yep, couldn't say it better myself. Benjamin Bonasso was the fifth highest scoring Miami Sharks player at 111.9. Again, a guy that you really just slotted into your lineup, kind of one of those mid-tier back rows that you were happy to have as a depth piece on your squad. And then Matthias Orlando, a guy that showed up later in the season, but when he did start at that center position, double digits in round 15 at 11.6, and then 8.9 in round 17. So it remains to be seen what Orlando can do with a whole season of opportunity, but at least with that small sample size, it does look like that he'd be able to carve out some fantasy relevance this upcoming season. All right, then going from Miami to the New England Free Jacks, your 2024 MLR champion New England Free Jacks. They also make some signings here and returnees here. We'll start off with their new players, Yero Gomez Vara, a guy that they selected in the dispersal draft, going to the New England Free Jacks, and also Kyle Steeves, another player that they selected in the dispersal draft, going to the New England Free Jacks. So two guys, marquee guys, Yero Gomez Vara, definitely a guy that we've talked about here on this show when it comes to fantasy performance. He's going to go to a team that has a bolstered back row room. We'll get into more about his fit there in just a bit when we talk about winners and losers in this dispersal draft. But at least with his time in Dallas, we know the impact that Gomez Vara can have. And then I think the big thing here too, with New England Free Jacks, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Five returnees for the New England Free Jacks. Josh Larson, John Poland, Jason Potros, Kyle Sakara, Andrew Quattrin, your kind of staple guys of this New England Free Jacks squad, all coming back to this team who is looking to make it three in a row. And this is John Poland injured last year, coming back. They'll be even better. We know the impact that Larson has, especially from a leadership standpoint. Friend of the show, Andrew Quattrin, we've had him on the show to talk about kind of what makes things tick here for the New England Free Jacks and Kyle Sakara. I mean, with that here, we just love to see him back. And then we all talk about Jason Potros in terms of the impact that he has. One of the best fly halves when it comes to fantasy in the last couple seasons at least. I mean, New England just seems to be rolling here and looking determined to come back here to win three in a row.
Yeah, I mean, how do you carry a culture even though there's management changes? You bring back the same staples and the veteran players that held this team together. And those five guys, I mean, those guys are pretty important guys to this roster. The fact that they are keeping the duo of John Poland and Jason Protros is huge for both of them. I think that's really great to see for the New England offense, and as well as John Poland and Jason Potros' fantasy stock.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can be pretty confident
By
in
the
all
way,
these guys going into next season.
found out that in NPC Bunnies Cup in New Zealand, they called Jason Potros White Mamba.
White Mamba, is that
So
so? No.
I was looking on Reddit, and this guy goes, "Is that where White Mamba went to?"
Yeah.
I've been wondering where he's been all this time, and I guess, hey, coming out of Tartanaki, when you got that bald head, I guess there's only one thing that you can be called, and that's
Yeah.
White Mamba.
White Mamba. All right. We're definitely making that a staple here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show. But again, the New England Free Jacks look to come back even more determined with the five re-signings of those marquee players. And then now the addition of Yero Gomez Vara and Kyle Steeves. Last but not least, we got to talk about a team that has been talking about all departures. Haven't seen what the heck is happening outside of that French returnee or French signing that they had last week that we talked about in terms of the signing of Kellyan Galatier. But
Oof.
it is another departure for Nola, and that is Dougie Fife is leaving, and so is Fintan Coleman. That is seven players who have left this
And
Nola Gold side in the past couple
hey,
weeks.
make it eight, because Sean Perigny also leaving.
Okay, eight in the last past couple weeks. Is this a Utah Warriors type thing where they're getting rid of a lot of these guys because they have a plan in place with some guys returning? I don't know. It's interesting. I think the faith in Nola right now is kind of questionable in terms of what their outlook of the upcoming season. They're kind of similar to Utah, where they've had this potential, they've had these players where they're like, hey, on paper it looks like it's something could work. It just hasn't over the course of the past couple seasons. So I get it, change is needed, but right now we're sitting in that gray space where we don't know who's coming in outside of that Galatier signing signing. That is obviously a good one, but obviously they're going to
Great
need a
one.
lot more if they're going to replace 8 guys that have left in the last 14 days.
Yeah. So I mean, like Utah, we're looking forward to seeing who they sign and who they announce. Yeah, we'll find out, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, again, that's just you take a breath now. A whole bunch of signings over the course of the past week. Again, we kind of knew this was coming in terms of the fallout of the dispersal draft. It fit that our name of our last episode was Let the Dominoes Fall. Once that kind of took place, it was kind of that
Yeah.
spark that ignited all of this to come. And I expect more stuff to come, especially with the signings that are coming from the dispersal draft that will continue to happen over the course of the next several weeks. And we should have a clearer and clearer picture of a fantasy impact, especially when we start finalizing some of these guys' squads, one guy's return from overseas back into it. Because hey, we're in October already, late October, and we already know that the season is starting earlier than ever this upcoming year, and with preseason, I believe, starting in February. So we should see very, very soon some of these squads being finalized, which only helps us fantasy managers to start making some key decisions and also start ranking some of these guys, which will be fun here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show. But we do have a thing to dive deeper a little bit on that we have been alluding to. Obviously, the dispersal draft happened a couple weeks ago, Maddie. And we've had some time, you and I, to talk about the places that some of these guys have gone, and the opportunity that exists for them, how this impacts their fantasy relevance. And we do have some winners and losers for the people in terms of how their fantasy value has been impacted from where they will be playing respectively or prospectively in this 2025 season. Again, we want to mention, just like how Maddie mentioned at the beginning of the episode, a lot of these signings aren't final yet. We haven't heard announcements in terms of whether or not there has been an agreement made. Some of them are starting to come out, like the Juan Pablo Zeiss trade, like the New England Free Jacks signings with Yaro Gomez Vara and Kyle Steves. This is all speculation in terms of if we assume that these signings will happen. This is how their fantasy impact is going to look for the 2025 year, at least in our opinion. So, you want to dive into it, Maddie? You want to start with some winners here?
Let's do it.
All right, well, let's start off with some winners. Why don't I let you go first here, Maddie? Because he went first overall in the draft. He's first overall in your heart when it comes to winning in terms of fantasy MLR perspective. And you have Sam Galla up here as a big time winner for this Dallas Jackals dispersal draft in terms of the fantasy value that he sees himself in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no hiding the fact that Sam Galla's seemingly one of the futures of American rugby.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about 2030, whatever World Cup, you're thinking of this Sam Galla guy is going to be a staple of that American team at that point. And I think he just went to the perfect spot. I mean, you look at the second row room in on the Anthem team right now, or as last year ended, and it's nothing special, right? You got James Rivers, you got Lucas Gramlich, Regan Leslie, Logan Weiner. All these guys kind of switched into the lineup. Sam Gall is a guy that comes in and becomes a staple. He's a staple of that second row room and that engine room. And he will continue to do that. We saw what he can do in Dallas. We saw what he can do there. We move him to a talented offensive team, a guy who excels offensively, who can bring the back row like athleticism into the second row. And I think we're going to see I think he's landed in the perfect spot for him, a place where he's going to be seen as a leader. He's going to be seen as a staple player to the lineup. And there's going to be a hard press to find him not in the lineup, I think.
And I think that's going to be the common theme, Maddie, for a lot of these guys that we're going to be talking about in this segment, whether it's winners or losers. It's going to be about that opportunity that they do have in terms of seeing the field and being a staple part of that starting lineup. And again, yeah, Sam Gall is going to be the poster child of that because, to your point, leader, guy that's shown that he can play those full 80 minutes and be a guy in that lineup consistently. And again, future of American rugby, we know what the intentions are with Anthem RC. We'd expect that Sam Galla is going to be a big part of that. In terms of a fantasy perspective, again, 91.8 fantasy points scored in the 2024 season, a season that was riddled with injury for Sam Galla. Again, appears in those first 7 weeks, then doesn't appear again until round 16, recovering from that injury. But in that time that he was playing and starting consistently, I mean, at the second row position, a position we know, if you've been listening to this podcast, and been involved with fantasy MLR, is a desert when it comes to points. There
Yeah.
are not many points that come from the second row position, except for when it's Sam Gola. I mean, 18.3 in round two, 14.1 in round three, 12 in round four, and the list goes on and on and on in terms of hiring and being accountable for at least high single digit points. And when you have a player like that at your second row position, I mean, you're the happiest guy around because you have such a big advantage over other fantasy managers who don't have a guy like that. It's really a diamond in the rough, for a lack of better terms. That is Sam Gola. And to your point, Maddie, to round this out, he does go to an offense. When we talked about exciting offenses, Dallas Jackals were one of them. We saw
Yeah.
what he was able to do to capitalize that. I would say Anthem, yes, they didn't get any wins last season, but they were a team. We had Jake Turnbull on. They like to play that fast style, exciting style of rugby, and Sam Gola can take advantage of that. So from a play style perspective, we shouldn't see him take a hit too much when it comes to that fantasy output.
Yep, for sure.
All right, shifting over to my winner, kind of links into what your pick with Sam Gola here, and it might be a little bit of a cop out here, but my winner is anyone who got drafted to Anthem RC here. I think
What
Anthem
the
RC
heck?
as a whole
The heck is
is
that type of cop out?
Anthem RC as a whole, Maddie, I think are going to look so much better this upcoming year with the guys that they selected. Obviously, some teams had a bigger emphasis on selecting guys here in the dispersal draft than other teams. Anthem was one of those teams that wanted to take advantage of that, wanted to take and pick some of these young USA Eagles to start establishing them within the lineup. We know that there are probably going to be signings coming as well when it comes to some of the guys that we talked about. But I think as a whole, if the team gets better, and this offense gets even better, I think as a whole, there's going to be a higher fantasy output. So guys like McKean Ali Can, guys like Jason Tidwell, guys like Beckerman here that they signed as well. I think all of these guys are going to benefit from having a better squad overall. And I can bet my life savings that this Anthem team is going to win at least one MLR match this upcoming season. They will, as a franchise, have their first franchise win here in 2025. So I
All
think as a
right.
whole, anyone on Anthem RC is benefiting from a fantasy perspective here because the team as a whole is getting better.
Pretty low bar considering Turnbull just came on saying that they want to make it to the playoffs. So,
It's true.
uh, but
And
I mean, yeah, I think I agree partially, but I think there can also be a dilution of players, right? Like they can bring as many American guys in, and at the end of the day, there's guys that are potentially more talented on the American team than other guys, right?
Mhm.
Right. So like you look at a guy like McKean Ali Can, right? Like depending on what other signings they make or who else they bring in, is he going to be the starter or is he going to be the guy there? I mean, it looks like it, yeah, but you'll have to see. The one thing that I do, and I think Ryan, you had him as a bit of a winner, but Vogan Isaacs, I'm
Mhm.
interested to see exactly where he fits in. He's obviously not US eligible, extremely talented South African. They signed Mitch Wilson in the back three, but you think about the 15 position, and you think that okay, does he fit at that 15 position? Maybe. Where's Clive and Lobster going to be? Does he fit at the 10 position? Potentially.
Well, let me
Like,
stop you there, though. Vogan Isaacs is going to be on RFCLA.
right. See, I got messed up by the trade thing.
There you go.
Got messed up
It
by the whole
was an
trade thing.
Anthem pick who went to
Okay.
Old Glory
See, and
DC.
I'm getting mixed up with the A's. The stupid
Yes.
A's.
The-
The one that's shaped like a bell end, and the other one that's got a
That's
comic on it.
true. I fair enough.
Thank you for stopping me, but
No.
all right. All right.
Anyways,
Pretend I didn't say anything.
my point being though is that I don't think from a fantasy lens is that outside of a handful of guys that were fantasy productive because of the positions they were at. We think about Anthem guys and we think about production, right? We think of Oscar Collar, right? Who is yet to, we don't know for sure yet whether or not he's returning to the Anthem. We think about Junior Goffa. We think about Clive and Laubser, right? But people weren't necessarily itching to go get stocks when it came to fantasy on the Anthem side. I think that's going to change this year. And I think because
Yeah,
of these additions, because this team is better, again, as a whole, this team benefits and it goes in there.
fair
So
enough.
great.
Fair
But
enough.
to your point, let's move it on there. And now I'll go to my winner that I have is Vogan Isaacs. Vogan
Yep.
Isaacs
Not on
being
Anthem.
not
Going to
on Anthem,
RFCLA
going to RFC,
potentially.
going to RFCLA potentially. Yes, no official signing yet on whether or not he's made that agreement final with RFCLA. But we've had Andrew Coe, friend of the show, on the Fantasy Ruckers show before, and he's talked about that electric, fast style of play that they're targeting. And when you talk about guys that can fit in fast, electric styles of play, we saw what Vogan Isaacs was able to do with the Dallas Jackals that had that same type of mentality. And now he finds himself on a team, RFCLA, that has that same type of play style. And I think Vogan Isaacs is going to slot right in there. It's not like that back three room for RFCLA was necessarily filled, right? They had Andrew Coe, they had Rory Van Voot, and that third spot, whether it's switched from Jack Shaw, Brooklyn Hardiker, it really was a kind
Eh,
of a
yeah.
rotating back three.
And
And Rory Van Voot wasn't even necessarily a guy that was in there every single week. So I think Vogan Isaacs has an opportunity here to come in, really establish himself as a guy that's going to be a staple part of this lineup, especially with his play style. I mean, we go down the list before he got injured in that week 11 match. I mean, 17.4, 13.7, 17. This guy had all his games over 80 meters gain, plus scoring 3 tries in those 8 matches that he played. I mean, this guy was electric when he was on the field. And I think he's just going to do the same when it comes to what he's going to be able to do for RFCLA.
yeah, I agree. I think the 15 position is a place that they struggled. Another position that they had struggles, especially with injury, and had to bring a lot of guys in at the 10 position. And we have seen Vogan Isaacs play both. I guess same thing. My messaging still stands for RFCLA, as I said when I was mistakenly saying he was on the Anthem. His positioning, whether he's at 10, whether he's at 15, it could be interesting to see. And his the way he fits in that lineup could impact his fantasy value differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have one more guy, a Utah Warriors guy that was selected in this dispersal draft that you have as your final winner.
Yeah, I got Nick Ben. Look, I mean, I think Nick Ben goes under the radar a lot of the time, right? Like you look at Nick Ben and you don't think of a guy who was the top back three fantasy point scorer for the Dallas Jackals,
Hmm.
right? You think of the guys like Tommy Milanos, you think of the guys like Vogan Isaacs, right? You think of the guys like Marcel Muller potentially. But you don't think about Nick Ben. And Nick Ben with 118.4 fantasy points was the top back three scorer for this team. And you look at the Utah side, they lose Caleb McEnany, they lose
Hmm.
Isaiah Crusay,
Hmm.
Noah Bain. I mean, he didn't play much, but he's not coming back. And you really look at that room and you try to figure out exactly who is going to be filling those gaps. They potentially still have Joe Mono, right? They potentially still have Michael Manson. Uh, but you see a spot there. I think Nick Ben fits perfectly into that back three and an offense that we talked about is very electric and could put up points whenever they want to.
And I mean, that's what I think even last year, going into last year, everyone wanted a share of the back three room of Utah. I mean, Michael Manson, Caleb McEnany, Joe Mono, right? Those are all three guys that were very fantasy relevant, especially Joe Mono towards the tail end of the season. Again, a season that started with a little bit of injury. But if you shift out Caleb McEnany and you put in Nick Ben there, his value is sky high. And I would be just as happy. I don't think they're losing much going from
Yeah.
McEnany to Nick Ben.
Well,
So I think it's going to be
McEnany,
interesting.
yeah, I mean Manson goes to 15 and Nick Ben sits on the wing. And I think that's the way it is, and that's probably the best way to go for that lineup. And I think that's a great opportunity for Nick Ben.
I mean, Manson was electric at that fullback position. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Nick Ben, Michael Manson, Joe Mono, prospective back three, starting back three for Utah. That seems pretty spicy to me. All right, just one last guy that I want to mention as a winner. We had him on the show a few weeks ago, but Brock Gallagher. He's finding himself on the Seattle Seawolves. Obviously, he's not necessarily going to, overtake one of the best nines in the entire league in JP Smith, but the pace at which JP Smith and the utilization that JP Smith had last season was not something that I think is sustainable for a team. He basically started almost every single match except for three this past season. And we know that when it comes to the nine position, at least for a lot of other teams, we did see a little bit more of a rotating factor when it came to that nine position. But JP Smith, if you had him in fantasy, we're very, very happy because you knew he was going to be starting each and every week. But the flip side, as you look at it, okay, there is an opportunity for that backup nine to come in. And Brock Gallagher is more than just a guy that's going to sit behind JP and not find minutes. We had him on the show. He talked about the confidence he has in his play. And I think Seattle with this pick is showing that, hey, we got to give minutes elsewhere and we got to give JP Smith some rest. I'm not saying that Brock Gallagher is necessarily going to be a guy that's going to be drafted and starting, but from a streaming standpoint, he's going to be great. On a week that JP Smith is sitting out and Brock Gallagher is in there at the starting position, with the talent that he has as a player, on top of being on a Seattle Seawolves side, I think he's going to be a premium streamer if he ever finds himself starting at that nine position for the Seattle Seawolves at some point, inevitably in the season.
Yeah, offensive talent too, which is always great for
Yeah.
fantasy.
Always great, especially at that nine position. Always love to see those guys attack. All right, let's go to the flip side of things, though. Now, Maddie, let's talk about some losers from this. Again, this is not necessarily reflective of whether or not this was a good or bad move for the teams that picked them or for the player themselves in terms of the opportunity they find themselves in. But from a fantasy perspective, when we are drafting our teams in 2025, this is going to hurt their value, and they're not going to be seen as highly, at least in our eyes, as a draft commodity or fantasy commodity in this 2025 season. I'll go first here, Maddie. My first one is Juan D. Oliver. Funny enough, we start with Brock Gallagher there. His counterpart, Juan D. Oliver, goes to Houston as the other Dallas Jackals 9. And Juan was a guy that saw a lot of playing time for Dallas. And he was a guy that was kind of that attacking mentality in terms of being a part of that Dallas Jackals offense. Again, starting a whole bunch. He was a guy that could bust out for you 4 double-digit points, which is very valuable at the nine position. But now he goes to a Houston team that does have one of the most consistent, if not the most consistent nines in the entire league when it comes to fantasy, and that's Andre Warner. Assuming Andre Warner is coming back to the Houston SaberCats to finish off what Houston wants to get done here, I can't imagine Juan D. Oliver is going to be a starter there. He's going to almost, it's kind of ironic, is flipping in that same position with Brock Gallagher. Again, will Juan D. Oliver be a streaming option when he starts for Houston? Absolutely. But he's not going to have that same fantasy value as what he had on Dallas last year. It's almost like an evening of tables, right? Like last year, Juan D. Oliver had mega fantasy relevance compared to Brock Gallagher, but now with their new spots, they kind of even out in terms of their value. I would almost say their values almost even now. I would be okay with having Brock Gallagher or Juan D. Oliver as streaming options at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really dependent on what happens in that nine room, like you said, Rye. So we'll see what happens with Andre Warner. We'll see what happens with Carlo Denishan. But I think to me, Juan D. Oliver is definitely a guy that's going to be a regular starter for that Houston SaberCats side if Andre Warner does not return. So,
yes.
I mean, this could very quickly, with one announcement, turn into a very big win for him. So 100%. We'll have to find out.
100%. Again, this is assuming that Andre Warner is back. But yes, this is an easy one to copy and paste into the winner column if Juan D. Oliver is their starting nine and Andre Warner is not returning. But for you have a front rower here that may have lost some fantasy value here heading into.
Yeah, I was going to say another former Dallas Jackal, but they're all former Dallas Jackals. So yeah, DeWalt Coates, I mean, we don't see him on the loser side of things a lot because just of how good of a season that he's had. But this one I think is just rough for his fantasy value. I mean, you look at the Seattle Seawolves, you look at Joe Telfede being on that side. I haven't seen any news about him not playing for them. And he's kind of a staple in that front row for them. And he's been a high producing front rower for the Seattle Seawolves. And I think it's just Dual Coates. He comes from an environment where he's kind of the front runner, the clear cut number one starting front rower and starting hooker to a situation where he's going to be sharing time with Joe Telfede. And we'll have to see how that works out. But I think he'll definitely be losing the same opportunities that he had to score as many tries as he did.
And again, caveat here is that if Tofeti is not for some reason on the Seattle Seawolves
For
in this
some reason,
upcoming year.
I had this thought in my head that like he announced his retirement or something, but I
I
don't
don't,
remember
yeah,
that.
I don't
I don't
recall that
remember that
happening.
being in calls. It must have just been in my head, hoping for
Again,
Dewalt Coates' value to stay the same.
well, Dewalt Coates, I drafted him and he was a plug and play option. Or no, I even picked him up after that first week when he scored a ridiculous what was it, 3-try match that he had in that round one for Dallas.
Mhm.
Um, again, a guy that was the marquee starter for the Dallas Jackals. Again, I think he'll have more value than what Daquan Perry was for the Seattle Seawolves last
Yes.
season. I think Dewalt Kotza will come into the starting lineup a lot more than Daquan Perry did. Daquan Perry, again, starting at the hooker position only 3 times this past year. Joe Tafetti coming in a lot, obviously, as their marquee guy. I think they'd like to take some of the load off of Big Joe because there were some injury concerns throughout the season when it came to his play. So I think having another guy in there, having a guy that is as marquee as DeWalt Kotza is going to only benefit the Seattle Seawolves. Again, from a playing standpoint and from a team standpoint, this is a great move for the Seattle Seawolves. But to Maddie's point, from a fantasy perspective, less opportunity is only going to hurt that value. And if DeWalt Kotza is not seeing the field as much as he did as the Dallas Jackals, obviously his point production is going to go down. But as a counterpoint, when he is starting, I mean, I think Seattle is could be even more electric from a front room pack than Dallas was in terms of the utilization they do have on that pack. I mean, we saw it with Big Joe at times when he was able to score like a 2-try game in round four. And if Dewalt Coates is starting for them, again, a great streaming option, just going to hurt his value quite a bit. Might be a guy you have on the back end of your roster in terms of when he does start, you have him ready to plug and play. A guy that I want to mention as my second loser of this. Again, I think it's a great move for the team. I think it's a great move for the player. He finds himself on a championship caliber team. It's going to be a great opportunity for this player. We talked about him in our news and notes segment, and we know that the depth issues that New England faced last year when it came to the injury-ridden back row room that they had, obviously with the unfortunate injury to one of the best back row players in Vian Conradi, but Yaro Gomez-Vara. Again, fantastic player. We talked with Brock about how much of a machine he is and one of the best forwards on that Dallas Jackals team last season. He finds himself in a very formidable New England Free Jacks room. But for me, it's now just the concern of when are you going to be able to depend on this guy to play. And I think the output on there, he's not going to be as much of a plug and play guy. For the Dallas Jackals, he was in the lineup every single week, virtually, and he was producing great stuff for you. Had as high as a 32.5 fantasy point game in round 10 for you. But now he joins a back row room that is filled, like we mentioned. They have Vian Conradi, Seta Baker, Martin Sigrin, Piers Von Dallison, Cam Davidovich, Jed Melvin, Ethan Fryer, Mitch Jacobson, Jacko Bezanduin, I think is how you
Nice.
say it. But again, these are all guys outside of Jacko. These are guys that all scored over 34.2 fantasy points. It's a deep, deep room. Now you find Yaro Gomez Vara in that. Again, when he's in the lineup, very valuable. He's going to be a starter, no question about it. But he loses that plug and play title for him because he joins such a star-studded room that is going to be rotating this back row room, we suspect.
Yeah. It's hard to argue with that one. Great for the New England Free Jacks, not great for fantasy owners, that's for sure. But you know, we're gonna see cases like this as we reduce the number of teams in the league. It's just more talent on less teams.
Sure. All right. And then
Um,
to round it out, Maddie, you got another back row guy that finds himself on a
yeah,
different team.
yeah, and I'm gonna go with Sam Tuifua moving to the Houston SaberCats. I think this is a great situation for Houston. I think it allows them to bolster their back row. But you look at that eight position, you look at the likes of Ronan Murphy, who had a standout and breakout year last year, also being US eligible. Um, you see him in that position. You see Gideon Van Vyk. Yes, he didn't have a great year last year. He hardly played, but I still think that old Gideon Van Vyk is still in there. Like that high performing Gideon Van Vyk is still in there. And then you add Sam Tuifua. So I just think that when you come to lineup decisions, it's not as easy as it was in Dallas to just put him at that eight man spot. Ronan Murphy could move to flanker, yes, but we haven't seen Van Vyk at flanker at all. We've only seen him at 8. So it'll be interesting to see how he fits in. I'm just a little worried that his opportunity at 8 isn't going to be the same. But, you know, you also think about the lack of expansive style of play for Houston.
Hmm.
Tuifu was a very expansive player and had a lot of his kind of big fantasy points breaking through on the wing in the 15s,
Right, right.
and really making a difference there. But you look at this Houston side, the way they play very tight, the way they play very controlled, not necessarily the fastest or most expansive style of play. Does his gameplay almost get impacted by that?
And that's what's interesting too, right? Like again, Ronan Murphy, 121.1 fantasy points, Sam Tuifua 154.1, right? And obviously, like we mentioned, Sam Tuifua was part of that kind of expansive Dallas Jackals style offense. Ronan Murphy, the head of that kind of slow pace forward style play. Now, where does Sam Tuifua slot in that? Again, the question that Maddie and myself are asking. It'll be interesting.
Yeah.
And we'll see because again,
But
Sam Tuifu is such a special player. Again, from a Houston SaberCats standpoint, I mean that back row room is electric.
I mean,
Just
so
terrifying.
So yeah, and but you look at the way that they scored points, like, and I think this bodes exactly to the style of play that they have. You look at Ronan Murphy's meters gained, none of it's over 50 meters gained, or
Sure.
maybe a couple over 50 meters gained. You look at Sam Tuifu, he's over 75 meters gained almost every match that he
Right.
played in. And you just wonder whether he's going to get that same opportunity in that type of offense. Because it's clear that Houston SaberCats had a goal and they said, we're going to beat you in tight. And
Yeah.
does that limit Sam Tuifua and what makes him special as a player? So
I guess that leads to a question. We'll wrap up this segment with this. Would you rather at this point right now have Yero Gomez Vara on the New England Free Jacks or Sam Tuifua on the Houston SaberCats?
to me, it's like it's hard to see a world where Yaro Gomez Vara doesn't start. Right, he's starting. He's way too good of a player to not start. The nice thing with Yaro Gomez Vara is that he doesn't play eight. He
Right.
plays flanker. He's played some games at lock, but he plays flanker. And you can have both him and Vian Conradi being successful at the same time in a game. Uh, so I would definitely start Gomez Vara. I think Tuifua is going to be a bit more hindered simply because where we got all of his points were from the tries,
Yeah.
was from the meters gained. And if the game style of play doesn't allow you to be expansive as a player, you're not going to get the same opportunity to put as many points.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's interesting because Sam Tuifua finishes off as the back row three. Euro Gomez
Probably
Vara
playing,
finishes
yeah,
as in the top 10 of back rows.
yeah.
Back row one, two,
I
three,
wouldn't be
four, five,
surprised
six,
if
seven, eight, nine.
Tuifua drops down to where closer to where Ronan Murphy is, or potentially lower.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting enough. Interesting enough. Yeah, Ronan Murphy, back row 10, Yero Gomez Vara, back row 9, Sam Tuifua, back row 3 in 2024. So we'll see how that kind of shakes it up in the 2025 season. But yeah, there goes our winners and losers for the dispersal draft for fantasy managers out there again. So take it for what you will, but this is what we see at this point in time. Again, we're waiting, anxiously waiting to see when and where these guys sign and make their draft picks official. Again, guys like Yaro Gomez Vara, we've heard from. Guys like Vogan Isaacs, still not sure. So we'll see that kind of shake out here in the time to come. And again, we've mentioned this on episodes before, but as the offseason continues to march along, especially because of the earlier start to the MLR year in 2025, we're going to get a clearer and clearer picture of what these teams are going to look like. And as we do that, the fantasy value will become clearer and clearer. And yeah, I'm excited to break down some of these rankings, man, and start to really
I don't
dive
know.
into. I know it didn't look so hot last year when we did our top five rankings, but I feel like we have a little bit more of a sample size to go off of. We'll
Yeah,
see
okay.
whether or not we'll be a little bit more successful. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. It definitely has not lended itself to a little bit of fantasy drama here in this offseason, having this dispersal draft here going forward. Anything else you want to wrap up? Any players you want to name before we move on to
No,
the last segment of the show, Maddie?
no, I think that's it.
All right. Let's move on to our final segment, one of our favorite segments, and definitely Vandy's favorite segment, and that is Triple D, Devin's Degenerate Dambles, brought to you by Betstamp. Betstamp betting made easy. We partnered with Betstamp to do our TFR betting challenge, where Vandy and I have
Yep.
started with $50 to see
And now
who
you
can
have
make
almost nothing.
to see who can make the most money here when it comes to the world of rugby outside the MLR during this off season. We partner with them and we were able to provide our viewers and listeners and our community members a nice deal here when you use our link down below, signupexpert.com/the fantasy ruckers. It's a nice little link that helps curate all the sports books that are available in your area and the new user deals that you can take advantage of. It geolocates your area, and it just pops up everything. It's really, really nice. Again, I've mentioned on this show before, Fanatic Sportsbook is a brand new thing. Didn't know that it was available in Pennsylvania. Found out by using my link, and I now know that it is available and can capitalize on some of those new user deals. So click the link down below if you want to get in some of the action when it comes to betting on the world of rugby, and maybe or maybe not take some of our advice on some of our picks. But again, you can take advantage of those new user deals down below. Yeah, and when Maddie alluded to when it comes to where the TFR betting challenge stands,
We stink.
the winners keep on winning, huh? Vandy's putting on these whack bets that we don't even talk about here on this show. I think he's going underground. I think the reason why he's not on this show, or partly one of
Possible.
the reasons why he's not on the show, is because he's locked himself in the basement somewhere. And he's now just looking at all these screens in terms of trying to figure out where the advantage lies in some of these picks.
Well,
And
whatever
he
he's doing,
pressed good.
he's kicking your butt.
So Vandy's right now still in the hole by about $12, but he has bounced back quite nicely here to a payroll of $38.02. I am down to measly $3.86. We're staying afloat by as much as we possibly can. To give people
Yeah.
a recap, I went with the long shot parlay and the URC. Went with a three leg underdog parlay. And now
To be
looking back,
fair, everything except the odds were telling me that Glasgow and Munster were going to win. I'm pretty sure Munster won, but Glasgow losing, I mean, it looked like based on some of the highlights and some of the wording around it that, Glasgow almost came back and won it.
so I was so confident last week that I put in the bet literally right after the recording this show. Typically, I wait
Well,
until Thursday.
you might
I
lose the
heard
odds.
I heard from you, Maddie. You got to put it right away. Did that kind of skew my thoughts here a little bit? Maybe it did,
Maybe.
but yeah, you're right. It was a two-pick parlay, Glasgow and Munster, both of them missing. The Stormers beating Munster 34 to
Why?
19, and the Sharks
Oh,
beating
see, both of them
Glasgow
missed. Yeah.
28 to 24.
See,
So that didn't work. But
I don't understand.
a silver lining, though, is that I did win my measly $1 pick on Waikato covering the 7.5 spread with Wellington. They did end up losing to Wellington, but less than seven
Yes,
and a half
sir.
points. It's 29 to 24. So I did make some of my money. Did still lose $1.14 last week. So we
Oh
are
no.
on the edge of trying to
Well,
stay alive here. Vandy went with the whack pick of I don't know where he got the tip that this was going to be the good one for, but he goes in the let me pull up our group chat here. He goes with the
the over
over
Bristol versus I think
the
Saracens or something.
Saracens over 58 and a half, and it hits over 50 and a half. The guy had the cojones to put $5 on that, wins him back basically double the money there, which gets him up to almost $40. So we're still scraping
Well,
by here, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer after another week of the TFR betting
well,
challenge. But we have some time to make some money here, Maddie. We
two
we
weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I have tried to make bets on URC. Also, by the way, Ryan, Newcastle they won. By the way, so Newcastle's no longer a thing. I mean, Exeter, Newcastle, Exeter. Those might be the
okay,
two
so I
teams that
should
we just gotta. And you know who hit it? Ethan Grayson hits the game-winning drop goal for Newcastle.
there
His
you
first
go.
ever professional game, starting at 10. So I mean, San Diego Legion fans, you
So
should be happy about that.
what you're
But
saying is that I gotta put the rest of my $3.86. Let me pull it up for you. What do you
well,
think the odds are
I was actually
for
going to say
for
I'm
the
staying
new
away. I'm staying
no no
away
no
from
no I
Premiership
know
and
I
I'm
know
staying
that
away from URC
this is kind of the joke here is
and
that
top 14.
um what do you think
And
the odds are for Newcastle winning the Premiership? The
do not
futures
put
bet.
do not put any of that on there. But it is what plus 10,000.
It is plus 100,000.
Yeah, there we
I
go. That
bet a
sounds about right.
dollar I will win $1,000 if that happens. What? The win this past week doesn't have your confidence sky high? Come on. I would look like a moneymaker if that came through. No, that's probably a
Yeah,
lost
nope.
$1.
Stay away from these ones. I'm scared of these ones. I know nothing.
All right. Well, let's talk about what we're looking at here this upcoming week. Interestingly enough, I was perusing at least on the sports books available here in Pennsylvania where I'm stationed, and this is why a great tool is our signupexpert.com/the Fantasy Ruckers is because you have a lot of sports books that you're going to be signing up for through our link. And I found out this week that for some reason, the leagues are not available. The games for this weekend are not available on DraftKings as of yet, of the time of the recording of this podcast. And then my backup is typically Bet Rivers, and they only had the one final for the NPC
Oh, we got
happening
to put money on that.
on that one. And then I went over to FanDuel to check out the odds there, and they do have them up there. So we're good. We still have our games, and we can find a way to find that. So let's talk about some of the
Do the
games that we're
final,
looking to
Ryan.
pick. Let's do the
Start
final.
with the final. Bay of
All right.
Plenty versus Wellington.
Let's
I
start with
already
the
know who I'm
final.
going for. It's right here. This is who I'm cheering for.
Okay.
And I'm yeah. Let's see.
All right. Well,
Let's see what the line is.
let's play the game that we play each and every week, Maddie. What do you think the odds are for the Wellington Bay of Plenty game?
Bay of Plenty are dogs by 7.5.
All right, let me pull it up here. It is Bay of Plenty are the underdogs by
Yeah.
4.5 points.
Whoa.
4.5 points. So the money line is plus 155 underdogs for Bay of Plenty. Wellington are minus
No.
205 favorites.
No.
4.5
Plenty's not
spread.
winning.
4.5 spread.
Woo. No, that is
It's a weird.
tough.
That's a weird line. That
If
is a
it
very
was-
weird line.
I thought it because Bay of Plenty is not like they are on big underdogs here. Like Wellington has been a wagon this year. If it was 7 or something like that, I would have said take the spread, take the dogs. But I'm gonna have to say, I think Wellington wins by over 4.5.
Okay.
It's finals rugby, but I think Wellington wins by over 4.5. Wellington's got a team over there.
All right. So Wellington covers the 4.5 spread. All right. So that's our NPC Bunnings pick. You're staying away from URC. You're staying away from
Yeah.
Premiership.
I'm not telling you to stay away. I'm telling don't listen to me for URC or Premiership. However, Exeter plays the Harlequins and Newcastle plays Gloucester. They are all at the bottom of the table. It's like literally the bottom 4 teams of the table. I'm not touching that.
Okay.
That's not what I'm going to do.
Guess the Gloucester Newcastle line on FanDuel.
Gloucester, Newcastle. I don't know. It's got to be what? It's got to be at least 10.
Gloucester is favored by 17.5.
I mean,
Do you think Newcastle can lose by less than that?
I think so. But
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think the Exeter Harlequins is?
if that's 17.5, this one's got to be at least 14.
No, 5.5.
Well,
5.5.
Yeah, I'm
Harlequins
thinking
are
of the Harlequins of old. I think that's what's happening.
Harlequins are 5.5 underdogs in that one. All right. But
Really?
yeah. Man, you said see, it scares me when you have a reaction like that because you did the same thing last week and I lost money.
I thought I would never think that the Harlequins are underdogs here, especially with the way that Exeter has been playing so far this season. But again, I need to
Are you
brush
sure?
up.
Are you
I
sure?
need to brush up on this. If you wanna do it, take Harlequins money
Plus
line as the
200
dogs.
is the money line for the Harlequins.
Yeah, I would put down on that. Like personally, I would put down
You're
on
a dangerous man, Maddie. That is, I don't know whether to believe you. People are losing faith. But all right, you said it. You said it. You're not picking Premiership and you're not going URC this week. But
the Harlequins lost by 2 to Bath. There's no way that they're dogs here. They lost by 2 to Bath.
5.5
How
dogs.
are they dogs here?
5.5 dogs.
The URC thing, that's messing with me because the Sharks sucked a week ago. And then they won. And Munster's supposed to be a wagon. Whoa. I don't understand. I would take the dogs or take the money line there. Wait, what's the spread, right?
5.5.
But what are the odds on that?
Minus 112 at 5.5. So you get double your money essentially, a little bit less than double your money.
Wait, they're dogs at no.
So 5.5. The money line is plus 200.
Yeah. But what's the spread?
5.5 points.
Oh, but they're saying like, oh, like you have better odds for them to be within 5.5.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I would take the money line here. All right. You got Marcus Smith there, and come on now. They lost. They only
Oh
yeah.
God. Oh
Yeah,
God.
money line right there. I like that one.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much you like it?
Like I like that one a lot.
More than you liked Munster or
Like exactly the
Glasgow?
same level.
No, see, I did. You got to go D. You got to go harder.
Exactly the
No,
same level
that's
as
not gonna.
that.
That's not gonna cut
I
it.
liked it then. Hey, I'm
That's
not
not gonna
talking about
cut it.
the outcome. I like it the same amount of level that I like those ones.
All right. Well,
They felt like shoe-ins at the time.
okay.
So does this
So
one.
if we're keeping track, Maddie likes the four and a
I'm
half
like
spread
0
in
and
front of
17.
Wellington, minus 4.5 as the favorites, and then he likes the money line at plus 200 for the Harlequins upset
I do like that.
over
I don't
Exeter.
understand how they're dogs.
All right.
It
The
confuses me.
last match that you wanted to talk about here was we do have some international rugby here coming up this
People, November
Saturday.
test series are coming up.
It's going to be fun. And these are going to be the ones that I think, Maddie, you're going to have the most fun. If I can stretch out my $3.90
You
to make
have
it to
to.
November test, I think this is when we'll start making some money. Because this is where our knowledge lies. URC, Premiership, NPC to an extent.
I
Again,
got
kind of
MPC
thrown.
locked.
Sure.
I'm a lock in MPC.
Sure. We'll call it that. But we do have Japan taking on New Zealand this
In
weekend on
Japan.
Saturday in Japan. Maddie, guess the spread.
Uh 18,
What if I told you it was higher?
24,
What if I told you it was higher?
32.
30.5. New
Yeah, take
Zealand is
Japan. Take
30 and a
Japan.
half favorites.
Take Japan. Let me tell you why. Let
Okay.
me tell you why.
Educate me.
Okay. Let me tell you why. We've seen this New Zealand team. They
Yeah.
haven't been necessarily the New Zealand of old.
Okay.
Okay. They are not the classic All Blacks. They are getting accustomed to their new coach, Razor. They're learning new game plans. They're coming into this November test series. Their roster mainly unchanged. However, they do have some guys coming in for injury cover. When they play their first game against Japan, they often play some of their development guys. These might be some of the guys that are fringe guys that they want to get caps. They want to get in there, get them experience. I believe that this is going to be the sign here again. I think that you should see Peter Lakai in there. You should see a guy like, well, Roy Guard's already got caps, but he's probably going to be coming back in this match. You probably will see a guy like Ruben Love in there. I think Japan losing by over 30. I don't think that's going to happen.
All right.
Now,
Yeah.
I've seen the All Blacks do it often.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm gonna look up their last meeting. I want to know what the last score was. When was the last
Okay,
score?
let me see. New Zealand versus Japan. Will that change your idea at all?
No, I still think that 38-31, I think.
Yes, 38-31 is what I have
So,
in 2022.
oof. See, and that was even, to be fair, the Japan side was probably better than
Yes.
it is now. But
See, but then you go down the list, right? This is where it starts to get scary. Is New Zealand beat Japan 69-31 before that, 54-6 before that, 83-7 before that. In 1995, let's go back then, 145-17. So when you read score lines like that, the 30 and a half doesn't sound too great.
Yeah, what are the odds on that though? What are the odds?
What are the odds on what? 30 and a half?
30. Yeah, the
minus
dogs.
110.
That's not even good enough. That's not even good enough odds to put down on.
So you're backing out.
Yeah, screw this one.
Or do you think New Zealand can beat 30 and a half?
What's the odds on that one?
Not about minus 110 too.
Yeah. Minus 110. Nah.
Okay.
I mean,
What
if you're going to put it on this, I would put it on 30 and a half for Japan. I think they cover that. But it's tough.
Right. What if I told you What if I told you that a parlay with the Harlequins money line,
Yeah.
Japan plus 30.5.
No, I would if you're gonna do parlay, I would do the All Blacks money line.
Okay, but that's gonna be like that. Okay, okay. Let's pull it up. Let's pull it up. Well, this will be the last thing. I know this episode's getting a little bit long, but we got to win some money here. So we got to start thinking big here. So Harlequins money line. All right, let's see here. Harlequins money line. And unfortunately, they don't have the NPC on FanDuel. The money line for New Zealand. Guess what the money line is?
Like what, 10,000 or something?
Minus 50,000. So,
Oh,
okay.
so not even a point, really.
No, the two-leg parlay, yeah, it basically gives you the same odds. You'd be better off just betting on the Harlequins.
Yeah, I would honestly just like I don't even the issue is here's my hesitation is I don't know where this All Blacks team is. They look
That's
good
true.
for 40 minutes. They look crap for the last 40, and I don't understand where it is. I also don't know where this Japan team is. I mean, they come off a loss in the
PNC.
PNCs
Mm-hmm.
to Fiji. Does that mean that All Blacks are gonna wipe the floor with them? I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not sure because I have no idea where this All Blacks team is. However, I do feel good about that Harlequins versus X.
All right. So Maddie's, after talking it out, Maddie's final two picks of the week. He likes the 4.5 spread for Wellington.
And I'm biased.
A little bit biased there. But 4.5, there you go. And then you have the underdog Harlequins beating Exeter money line there to double your money. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't know what I'm going to be putting on. I don't know what
Good luck.
I'm going to be putting it on. Anyways, that is Triple D, Devin's Degenerate Dambles, brought to you by Betstamp. Betstamp betting made easy. It's funny because Vandy is going to make some whack pick about some over that's going to happen. Let's see. Okay.
I'm gonna make him bet on this All Blacks Japan game.
Yeah, it's crazy. Is there any way Japan wins this?
No.
No way.
No.
4,400 odds.
Do they lose by 30 or do they lose by 60? That's
So, all right. Well, Vandy's going to put some whack bet together and do that. Other bets that we have, Maddie, for
No.
this Wellington game. We got some props. Do you like any props? Any in that game?
well, the All Blacks are gone.
The All Blacks? Yes.
Yeah, all the All Black players are gone.
That's true.
Talk
about it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, not sure.
But
not sure. I'd have to take a look. I
right.
mean, we got to wait till the lineup gets released. So
That's true. Wellington. All right. So Wellington, 4.5 spread there. Money line. Harlequins over Exeter. All right. Well, Maddie, a jam-packed episode in this one. A whole bunch of flurry of moves. Gave our winners and losers from the dispersal draft. Should be a good one. And again, to all of our viewers, listeners, and supporters out there, we're going to continue to give some great off-season content all season long, continue to bring you some of those player interviews onto the show. We've had Jake Turnbull, we've had Brock Gallagher, we've had Andrew Quach, and we've had Andrew Cohen during this off-season. And we're going to continue to bring you guys that more and more fun content as we continue to build up towards the 2025 Fantasy MLR season. Once again, shout out to Vandy. All the best wishes to him and his family. Send him a message. Tell him all the best there. I'm sure Vandy would appreciate it. We'll hope to have him back on next week's episode. Maddie, anything else for the people?
nothing.
All right. Well, for Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I am Ryan. You'll be back next week with another episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Up the Lions.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.